The Dark Side of the Mouse. Written by Emily C. Burch. My name is Abby. And I work in the happiest place on earth. Well, properly I work in the Starbucks in the middle of Epcot. Day in and day out, I get to deal with impatient, rabid Disney families and the occasional drunk college student dying to get their caffeine fixes. And all the while, I get to do it with the energy of a Disney princess moonlighting as a barista. It's not terrible, but trying to keep a cheery smile on my face and a certain pep in my step gets difficult sometimes, especially lately. You see, I'm one of the newest hires, so I get tasked with all of the worst jobs, like running huge bags of latte-saturated trash to the underground trash compactor, opening most days and closing most others, and the occasional odd job, which what would turn out to be one of the scariest days of my life started like that, as an odd job. I dreaded it, sure, but it was innocent enough, right? The job was unusual right away, since it wasn't in my area. Hell, it wasn't even in Epcot at all. Back in the day, Disney used to operate a water park called River Country. Some of you will undoubtedly remember it fondly, as you should. The whole idea of the place was that it was supposed to look natural, so they built a bunch of realistic-looking rock formations and tried to blend it into the wildlife as much as possible. They took the theme even farther by connecting the pools to the adjacent Bay Lake, basically damming it off. The bottoms of all the pools were sandy, like a natural body of water, and the water was all filtered from the lake. It was a genius idea, and the park was a success ever since it opened in the 1970s. In 2001, the park closed for good. Disney gave a lot of reasons why, but the real one was simple. They had a death on their conscience. Growing up in Florida like me, you hear a lot of talk about the brain-eating bacteria that live in the water. These are Naegleria fowleri, bacteria that live in warm fresh water. They can get to your brain through your nose and cause a fatal infection. Here in Florida, a kid will die from it every 10 years or so, and it'll be all over the news. Of course, it doesn't put you off jumping into the lakes and rivers. Your parents just tell you to hold your nose shut like all the other kids, and bam, no Naegleria fowleri for you. As it turns out, Disney's filtration system wasn't enough to get everything out. The water in River Country, pumped in from Bay Lake, was contaminated with Naegleria fowleri, and it took the life of an 11-year-old boy. After the fatal flaw of River Country's design was uncovered, it was shut down. Rather than demolish it, Disney decided to abandon it. Everything still stands today, intact and eerie, slowly but surely being taken over by nature. How do I play into this? Well, as if the story of River Country isn't foreboding enough, all of the lights and music still run at the place. I've heard a lot of reasons for it, everything from preserving the remaining magic to the notion that the light and sound system is shared with some of the resorts. Whatever the reason, someone has to go out and change the light bulbs when they go out. Last night, one went out, and that lucky soul to replace it was yours truly. It certainly wasn't an assignment worth protesting, but I also wasn't looking forward to it. With the latest marathon running through the parks, the day was swamped. By the time I was able to grab the light bulb and trek out to River Country, it was twilight and my shift was nearly over. It was a real shock moving from all the laughter and smiles and exuberance that encompass all of the rest of Disney to this place of dead silence and emptiness. The place lived up to my expectations, at first. Nature had made some serious progress on taking everything over. The water was murky and green, calm at the surface, but God knows what beneath it. Branches began to grow over the water slides. The beach area was no more. A sign stood at the entrance, cheerfully announcing that the park was closed. The light bulb I was to change was located at the employee area, at the back of the park. As I walked, kicked aside branches, brambles, the occasional yellow ticket nearly ground into the dust by now. A stray inner tube sat off to my right in the woods, covered in pollen and mostly deflated. By now the sun was drawing close to the horizon, and if I didn't get the job done soon, visibility would become an issue. I picked up my pace, but I couldn't help to shiver as I sped past the pool where the boy had caught his fatal infection. I was starting to grow uneasy, and it was starting to affect me. Every time I turned, I would see a shadow. At first it just looked like people, then children, then Disney characters. I swear I saw a familiar mouse staring out at me from deep within the trees, but it was too dark to tell. But my mind had to have been but my mind had to be playing tricks on me, right? Finally, I reached the employee hut. As I walked beyond it, I saw a glimpse of color behind the dusty window. Stopping dead, my heart starting to race, I debated turning around. The wind was picking up and the leaves were rustling all around me. Goosebumps rose up all over my skin. I decided against it and speed walked to the only dark light bulb on the property. Just as I was about to breathe a sigh of relief, the previously dead light bulb began to flicker. My heart nearly stopped, but I stepped forward anyway. Now, the light turned on and stayed bright. I took another few steps, then stopped in my tracks. Now, all of the rest of the lights in the park were flickering. In shock and fear, I dropped the light bulb I had been carrying and it shattered on the ground. The hairs on the back of my neck rose, and I swear I heard something. And don't you laugh. But damn it if it didn't sound like a Goofy in the background. I know, it sounds insane, but when you spend as much time around the characters as I do, I knew his voice and his laugh. I would have recognized it anywhere. And I heard it echo through that place. The next second, all I could hear was my breath as I turned and I ran. I tried to stop myself from looking through that window as I raced by, but I couldn't. And what I saw haunts me to this day. Goofy was behind the glass, dressed in his silly swimsuit and his inner tube. Tick maroon blood was dried all over his black and white outfit, caked in his fur. Moss covered part of him, dust the rest. The employee hut was filling with water as he stood there, banging on the glass, smiling a wicked smile, and I can still hear the sick thumping of his fists on the window when I try to sleep. I could see the fur on Goofy's costume getting wet, see the water start to turn red, and the movement that meant that he was anything but animatronic. And just as I realized how real he was, the glass window shattered and the foul lake water spilled out. Goofy stood there, laughing, and laughing, and laughing, starting to crawl through the window. I turned to run, but I felt cold, slimy hands on my shoulders holding me back. Whispers were coming from all around me, including from in my own head, and the next thing I knew, my head hit the ground. When I came to, it was pitch black, and I was sitting in the first aid area of Epcot, surrounded by coworkers. Of course, they wouldn't tell me anything. Heat exhaustion, they said. Passed out at River Country, they said. Found by maintenance, they said. But I knew what I saw. I could hear the laughter ringing in my ears and feel the sticky, toxic lake water fermenting on my work clothes. I could still feel the clammy hands on my skin. Please believe me. No one else does, and I have to get back to work soon. My name is Abby, and I'm scared of what else the mouse might have in store for me.
Ever since the incident with Abby happened, all of us Disney cast members have been on edge. None of us want to work the night shift anymore. Whispers seem to call out from the shadows every time we do. It's a little harder to keep up the plastic smiles knowing what happened to one of us. But most of all, the anger at the higher-ups is constantly buzzing around the parks. Of course, the news of what happened spread pretty quickly, so the administration knew about it immediately, but they hadn't said anything about it yet, and we couldn't help but wonder if they would before tensions came to a head. When they told Abby she had to go back, she threw a fit. She screamed, she cried, and she had a panic attack, but it didn't matter. They had told her to change the light bulb, and change the light bulb she would. She begged and pleaded and demanded to know why the maintenance wouldn't do it, and it was a good point, of course, but all they would say is that the newest cast members have to go through some grunt work. In a world where grunt work is the stuff they can't get anyone who knows any better to do, Abby told them it sounded an awful lot like workplace bullying, and she threatened to go to the authorities. It wouldn't have mattered if she did, since they'd throw her case out the second she mentioned her ghostly Goofy. But Disney threatened to fire her nonetheless, and that was the end of the matter. So when she got sent back out into the remains of River Country, she asked me to go with her. And of course, it was flattering, but more than that, I remembered the errands they'd sent me on when I first took the job, and after everything that I'd gone through, I couldn't help but go with her. We left right after my shift, and I didn't even have time to change out of my Naveen outfit, so I ventured into the twilight dressed like a valiant prince, which was the exact opposite of how I felt. And Abby started to get really anxious as soon as we got close, and She walked so close to me that our skin touched, and I could feel her shake. And as we approached the entrance to the abandoned park, I could see the rush of goosebumps rise on her skin. And as much as my own heart was pounding, I led her into the park, and immediately I noticed that all of the lights were out. Okay, there must be something wrong with the circuit. We can't do all of it. We'll have to go get maintenance, I said with relief. And a smile crept onto my lips despite the eerie silent night.
I want to see the employee hut,
Abby said, her voice suddenly determined and angry. But before I could say anything, a huge laugh echoed throughout the park, and it wasn't Goofy, like I was expecting, but Mickey. And sent a huge chill down my spine, and it was so loud. It sounded like it was being pumped in from the speakers, and it echoed and echoed until I was sure that I would kind of hear it in my own head forever. And as it happened, Abby screamed, and before I knew it, she ran into the darkness in terror. Great. So obviously I can't leave without her, so I went against everything my body was telling me and ventured in further toward the employee hut, just like Abby had said. The glass on the window... I couldn't leave without her, so I went against everything my body was telling me and ventured in further towards the employee hut. Just like Abby had said, the glass on the window was shattered. Murky water had risen high in the hut and it was lapping against the window. And in the water floated little white fragments that kind of looked like bone. Over in the corner, bouncing against the wall with the flow of the water, was a plastic eyeball from one of the characters. And against the window pressed a white gloved hand, completely detached from the rest of the costume. And there was nothing there to keep it in place, but it just kind of stayed as though someone was pressing hard to get out. And I'm not proud, but my stomach lurched, and when I turned away, Abby was in my face, and I flinched super hard at what I saw. Kind of had to choke back a scream, and when I was standing there frozen, the image of her standing there burned itself into my mind, and had it not been for the little blonde wisps of hair peeking out, I wouldn't have been able to identify her. Her head was encased in this ancient, rotting Mickey Mouse character head, and her body reeked of lake water. Patches of moss covered the oversized Mickey ears, and lake water was dripping from every inch of the fur that was still attached. Fur was missing in patches everywhere. It looked like a huge bite had been taken out of the mouse's jaw. The left eye was completely ripped away, down to the mesh, but I couldn't see anything but blackness behind it. And she just stood there, not moving. The mouse head sat kind of crooked and off-center, and Abby began to tilt her head to the left, and as she did, a trickle of blood started to make its way down her neck. And the wooded park was silent, except for the sound of her heavy, ragged breathing. Then a deep, rasping voice started to project from inside the mouse head. "Help us," hissed. Then, I'm ashamed to say, I turned and ran, and in my struggle to get away, I tripped over one of the artificial rocks and fell really hard. My hands and knees were all of a sudden slippery with blood that definitely couldn't have been my own, and I could hear clumsy, heavy footsteps approaching me from behind, completely unlike anything Abby could have made. I turned around just to see the demented Mickey fall, seconds before I felt it hit me. The weight was crushing. The only thing I could think was to pry the Mickey head off of Abby's body. And as soon as I began to pry, a guttural hissing sound came from within it. Like rabid foam began to pour from under the costume head as I pulled, and finally the head collapsed in my hands as though it was made of cardboard, and my heart was beyond pounding at this point, and I started to remove the broken parts and pull them away from Abby's face, and her skin was white and clammy, and it was burning hot to the touch, but that wasn't the reason I screamed. Lying there, unmoving and unaware, Abby's eyes were wide open. Her mouth was frozen in a huge, artificial smile like something else around the parks. By all accounts, she looked dead, but I could feel her pulse beating irregularly under my fingertips. And so I carried her out of there, leaving the light bulb and the broken Mickey behind me. Like, all the way to the car, she just giggled. Never once did she blink. She just giggled, and giggled just like the Mickey characters do all day. And right before we arrived at the hospital, she went completely silent. And what came out of her mouth next made my heart stop. "Help us." Something's going on here, and someone has to believe me. Her name was Abby, and I'm not sure if we'll ever get her back.